Now that funny billboards like Santa sees you when you're speeding and buckle up, windshields hurt, those are real, are about to be banned by the U.S. Federal Highway Administration because they're distracting. Somebody has to tell me why it's still okay to have long paragraphs of small writing and pictures of big tits up there. And God yelling at me. I'm just saying, if a little joke is too distracting when you're driving, what about this?
Good morning. It's Friday, Policecraft Friday, March the 1st, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Mafia, patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and Policecraft. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now, a little Mafia action.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody's doing well. And today I'm going to talk about 8 facts about the Mafia that you may not know. welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody's doing well. All is good on this end. You know, I have to admit, I'm not a Mafia historian. I don't read a lot of books on the Mafia. I do watch movies, basically for entertainment. You know, we review movies here on Mob Movie Monday. Everybody seems to enjoy that. But I don't consider myself a Mafia historian. I don't know why. Maybe I just don't have an interest in going way back and seeing the origin of the life and so on and so forth. I kind of lived that life. I experienced that life first with my father, who was pretty much a legend in the life, and then obviously through my own experience, which you're all pretty familiar with. But there are some things that I am interested in. I think you'll be interested in. Today I'm going to talk about 8 facts about the Mafia that you may not know. Number 1. You do not need to be Sicilian to be a member of the Mafia. You don't need to be. You need to be Italian. Your father needs to be Italian. At one time, you had to be a Sicilian. Another time, they changed that. You only had to be Italian. And now they changed it to only your father has to be Italian. That was true through my era. So you don't have to be Sicilian to be a member of the mob. The reason for that is because there are different mob groups throughout Italy. Fact number 2, Naples. The Camorra, that's another Mafia group. They're smaller. I think they have about 4,500 members, and they're known to be a pretty brutal group. I happen to be from Naples, Napoleon. I'm not saying I'm brutal. I'm just saying I just happen to be from Naples, as was my father. My mom and dad are both from Naples. But that's another group. They're called the Camorra, and there are a number of them here in the United States also. Fact number 3. Calabria, another city in Italy. There is the Calabrian group, Calabria Mafia. It's called 'Ndrangheta. They're kind of an offshoot of La Cosa Nostra, and I think they're known, unfortunately, for cocaine trafficking. And by the way, in Naples, too, a lot of drugs. Cocaine trafficking, that's a big thing for Camorra. I also know that they're pretty well established in Australia. I got to meet a few guys back then when I was over in Australia. So that's another group. So fact number 4. The Sicilian Mafia, which is Cosa Nostra, this thing of ours, is the biggest of the Mafia group. It's the origin of the Mafia, really began in Sicily, I think back in the 1800s. It's the model for all other Mafia groups, and it was the first group, Mafia group that came here to the United States. We talked about that once before. They first settled, first showed up in New Orleans, I think around 1870. Then they went to New York and Chicago and Kansas and Florida, and you know the whole deal. So the Sicilian Mafia, really the model. Another fact, the Puglia Mafia. Puglia is a small city, I think, in the southeastern part of Italy, and they're called a Sacra Corona Unita. Sacra Corona Unita, which means United Sacred Crown. It's the smallest of all the Mafia groups. They're known to be smugglers. They smuggle a lot of things in from Eastern Europe. I think they associate with a lot of the organized crime gangs from Eastern Europe. They smuggle cigarettes and arms and probably drugs too. Like I said, in Italy, there are more drug dealers than there are in the United States. Another fact that you're probably not aware of, I've gotten blowback on this all the time because you people read different things, but you don't really know the truth. The drug business during my era in this country was outlawed. I'll give you some proof of that. It was on an FBI recording, a tape recording between John Gotti and one of his guys, Angelo Ruggiero. Remember Quack Quack from the movie Gotti? We talked about that in a Mob Movie Monday. And in that conversation, Angelo tells Gotti, listen, I found out there was a conversation between the Chin Gigante, and Chin was the real boss of the Genovese family. I'll get into that. And Paul Castellano, that no drugs, and anybody suspected of being involved in drugs in any way, any MAID member suspected of involvement in drugs in any way was to be killed on the spot. No meetings, no commission meeting, no proof, nothing needed. Killed on the spot, and the reason for that, because they believed that anybody dealing with drugs was more susceptible to becoming an informant. And that was decided between the two bosses of the two most powerful families. It's on tape. And I told you people that in our family, the Colombo family, Persico, no drugs. We weren't allowed to get involved in it. I told you a story about a close friend of mine who was a made guy, Tony the Gawk, Big Tony the Gawk, who blew his brains out in a phone booth because he was afraid. He got involved in a drug deal. He knew he would get killed, and rather than getting walked into a room, he killed himself. There was no drugs allowed during my era. You can take that to the bank. Now, I'm not saying that some guys weren't doing it. They might have been doing it, but they weren't supposed to. It was outlawed. The proof of that, the conversation between the Chin Gigante and Paul Castellano at the time. Another fact you may not know, the real boss of the Genovese family was Gigante. And this was a known fact. The FBI picked it up on a number of surveillance tapes, on conversations between Fat Tony Salerno, Tony Ducks, I think they caught him on tape, talking about Chin being the real boss. Chin did not want the exposure. He wanted to last as long as he could. He took over, by the way, in 1981. When Benny the Squint Lombardo stepped down, he took over. It was a peaceful takeover. There was no confrontation about it, no argument about it. But he was the real boss, but he didn't want the exposure. So he enlisted Fat Tony to be kind of his guy. But I can tell you this, Fat Tony didn't do anything without putting it on record first with Chin. He was the real power. That's for sure. You could take that to the bank. Again, was very well known. I met with Chin once or twice because he sent for me. A really good friend of mine who was another made guy under Chin, Fritzy Giovanelli, he passed away now. He took me to see Chin. He and I walked along Houston Street. We discussed a number of things. And I will tell you this, Chin Gigante had a lot of respect for my dad. And Chin told me, he said, look, if you have any problem whatsoever with Persico, because there wasn't any love lost there, he says, you let me know, I'll bring you into my family. He made me that offer. Just want you to know that. But he was the real power. Another thing, and I've been getting some blowback on this because people are telling me, Michael, the books, okay, and you know that expression, the books were open when they were bringing in new guys into the family. In 1976, somebody said 77, another person said 78. Not true. The books were open in early 70s. Proof of that, Vincent the Chief Cafaro. He was a soldier under the Chin and under Fat Tony. He and I got friendly when we were in MDC together. We were locked up together. But he became a cooperating witness, and he let everybody know when the books were open. They were open up in the early 70s. He was made in 1974. Fact. I was made in 1975. So all this stuff that you're hearing, I have no reason to lie. If I was made in 76 or 77, I would tell you. It happened in 75. The books were open earlier than that. Vinny the Fish Cafaro, read it. It's true. It's in FBI documents and 302s and all of that. That's a fact. So I think these are things that could be interesting to you. I'm not going to overwhelm you. There are a lot more facts that I can start to give you, things that I have personal knowledge of. Because remember, I was around a lot of guys. You know, my father was not a historian. The stories he told me, the education he gave me, some of the old timers that I was around, Persico and all the other guys, you know, we sat down in our social clubs and we would talk, and they were just a wealth of information that came my way. So I'm going to keep filling you in with things that I think are interesting. But what I tell you today, you can take to the bank. It's all a matter of fact. So that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed it. You know, we're going to keep the content going. Subscribe. We got a lot of things coming up. Larry Lawton, it's coming up soon. Going to be interviewed by him first on his platform. Then he's coming over to my platform. We have over 6,500 members. MichaelFrancis.com. In my crew, 6,500 members. You people are enjoying it. I wish I can get some of the members on here to talk to you about what an amazing experience, an encouraging experience it's been to all of them. So join. It's free. You don't have to pay anything. You want to get into the inner circle? Yeah, you're going to pay a little bit money to have more access to me. But again, I put my heart in these things, and I think you're going to enjoy it. So that's it for today. I'm going to leave you with this. Be safe. Be healthy. God bless all of you. I'll see you next time.
Thank you. And now the patriotic shorts.
My father died when I was 11. My mother was running a dairy farm in West Virginia, and there was no way I could possibly get an endorsement. So I came home. And I came home with the intentions of joining the United States Marine Corps to protect America. because we're going to go to war. I felt that war could take away our freedom and our privileges, and I was going to be a part of protecting that. When I got home, I still was 17 years old. My mother would not sign my paper to permit me to go, so I had to wait until I was 18. I was 18 in October. In November, I went into Marine Corps recruiting to enlist, and I'm only 5'6" tall, and the recruiter, when he looked at my paper that I'd filled out for enlistment, didn't look at it, really. He just looked at me and said, "I can't take you. You're too short." So I went back to the farm. If I couldn't go in the Marine Corps, I wasn't going to go.
The F-15 Eagle is a combat-proven tactical fighter that can perform air-to-air and air-to-ground missions. It has been in service with the U.S. Air Force since 1976 and has a record of over 100 aerial victories. Russia still hates the F-15 Eagle because it considers it a threat to its own air superiority and regional interests. Russia has developed and deployed several fighter jets, such as the Su-27, Su-30, and Su-35, to counter the F-15 and other U.S. and NATO aircraft. Russia also has advanced air defense systems, such as the S-400 and S-500, that can challenge the F-15 survivability. The F-15 Eagle is not a stealthy aircraft and can be detected and tracked by Russian radars and sensors. However, it has a powerful radar, a high thrust-to-weight ratio, and a high level of maneuverability. It can also carry a variety of weapons, including air-to-air missiles, air-to-surface missiles, and precision-guided bombs.
I had to take some prisoners back to the command post, and this lieutenant said to me, "Coyle," he said, "get rid of them." And I wasn't sure whether I heard him right when he said get rid of them. What did he really mean? Well, I took about 14 prisoners back, hands up, me behind them, and the thought crossed my mind, did he really want me to do anything? But I took them back, and I thought if I killed them, I would have been court-martialed. But I read later on, and maybe you heard about this, that massacre in Malmedy, where, the Germans just lined up and massacred 100 field artillery troops with no compunctions at all. And it crossed my mind, did I do the right thing? Or if I'd known then, would I just opened up and left 14 of them on the ground? Well, I wrestle with it once in a while.
Did you know in the film Full Metal Jacket, R. Lee Ermey revealed an interesting detail about a deleted scene involving the character of Hartman? He mentioned that in this cut scene, Hartman is shown breaking character and warmly expressing pride towards the recruits for successfully completing their training. This moment was not present in the final version of the movie. Interestingly, this departure from his usual demeanor is reminiscent of a similar but not identical moment in the book, The Short-Timers. In the source material, there is a scene where the sergeant confronts a troubled Marine in the bathroom. During this encounter, the sergeant, instead of his usual yelling, starts to express something along the lines of, "I'm proud," before being abruptly cut off by a gunshot from the Marine. In the movie, Hartman meets his demise in the middle of a different outburst, rather than during a moment of unexpected warmth and pride, as hinted at in the deleted scene R. Lee Ermey mentioned.
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of motivation.
There was a lesson to learn from the Holocaust. We're always reminded that. Never forget. We've learned our lesson. What was the lesson? That's the question. And the lesson is, you're the Nazi. No one wants to learn that. I mean, that's what I've been teaching my students since 1993. It's like, if you were there, that would have been you. You think, well, I'd be Oskar Schindler. I'd be rescuing the Jews. It's like, no, I'm afraid not. Yeah. You'd at least not be saying anything. And you might also be actively participating. You might also enjoy it.
I don't care that they stole my idea. I care that they don't have any of their own. Of all things, I liked books best. The scientists of today think deeply instead of clearly. One must be sane to think clearly, but one can think deeply and be quite insane. If your hate could be turned into electricity, it would light up the whole world. Our virtues and our failings are inseparable. Like force and matter. When they separate, man is no more. Life is and will ever remain an equation incapable of solution, but it contains certain known factors. We crave for new sensations, but soon become indifferent to them. The wonders of yesterday are today common occurrences. What one man calls God, another calls the laws of physics. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. The individual is ephemeral. Races and nations come and pass away, but man remains. Our brain has very sensitive nerve cells, which allow us to feel the truth, even when it is not yet available. Time will judge us. Most persons are so absorbed in the contemplation of the outside world that they are wholly oblivious to what is passing on within themselves. Inventors don't have time for married life. Great moments are born great opportunity. The action of even the smallest creature leads to changes in the entire universe. As I review the events of my past life, I realize how subtle are the influences that shape our destinies. We are all one. Only egos, beliefs, and fears separate us. When natural inclination develops into a passionate desire, one advances towards his goal in 7-league boots. In continuous loneliness, the mind becomes sharper and sharper. Ideas are born in the absence of influence on the mind of external efforts. A new idea must not be judged by its immediate results. One's salvation could only be brought about through his own efforts. To know each other, we must reach beyond the sphere of our sense perceptions. My belief is firm in the law of compensation. The true rewards are ever in proportion to the labor and sacrifices made. The hard work of the future will be pushing buttons. Intuition is something that is ahead of accurate knowledge. There is nothing that could attract human attention and deserve to be a subject of study than nature. To understand a huge mechanism of nature, to discover its creative forces, and to understand its laws, this is the greatest goal of the human mind. How many people called me a dreamer? How our deluded, myopic world scoffed at my ideas. I guess I'll keep going until I drop dead. The great mysteries of our existence have yet to be solved. Even death may not be the end. A wise man should not marry, because no one can serve books and wife alike. The secret to being creative alone. Ideas are born in loneliness. Avoid sex in old age. After it comes to kissing, and then talking.
And that was a little motivation happening there. Thank you. And now the daily law for March 1st.
March. The master at work. Activating skills and attaining mastery. In moving toward mastery, you are bringing your mind closer to reality and to life itself. Anything that is alive is in a continual state of change and movement. The moment that you rest, thinking that you have attained the level you desire, a part of your mind enters a phase of decay. You lose your hard-earned creativity, and others begin to sense it. This is a power and intelligence that must be continually renewed or it will die. Your whole life, therefore, must be treated as a kind of apprenticeship to which you continually apply your learning skills. The month of March will teach you how to activate your skills and internalize the knowledge necessary for a life of mastery.
When I began writing my 5th book, Mastery, several years ago, something very strange and exciting occurred. This was a particularly difficult and complicated book to write. First of all, I had done my usual research, reading several hundred books, taking thousands of note cards on them, structuring them into various chapters, etc. But in addition, I had read a lot of books on science, which I had never done before. Books examining the nature of the human brain, to give mastery more of a scientific foundation. And that added yet another layer of difficulty to the writing. Furthermore, I had also interviewed 6 or 7 contemporary masters to give the book a more up-to-date feel. Incorporating the science and the interviews into Mastery made it a particularly challenging project. And so, when I began the actual writing process, it was very slow going with the first couple of chapters. It took longer than usual to get into a flow. And then, chapter by chapter, week by week, month by month, I started to gain a little bit of momentum. And then, by the 5th chapter, something unexpected happened. The 5th chapter is about the creative process itself. And the idea is that once you do enough work on a project, enough preparation, and you've had all of these months of experience delving into the subject, you often reach a state of creativity where ideas come to you out of nowhere. And suddenly, this was happening to me. After all my research and all the preparation, by the time I had reached chapter 5, ideas for that chapter were coming to me while I was taking a shower, while I was taking a walk. I was even dreaming about the book, and ideas were coming to me in my sleep, confirming what I was writing about. And this made me very surprised and very inspired. And then I came to chapter 6, which is about mastery itself, the final chapter. The idea is that even further along in the process, you start to have a very intuitive feel for the subject. It's almost as if the book or the project is living inside of you. You can compare it to a chess master, where the chessboard feels like it is inside his brain, inside his body, and he can feel what comes next. I felt that the book was living inside of me, and that I had what I call a fingertip feel for what I should be writing. There was this sort of fast-paced, intuitive series of ideas that would come to me out of nowhere. And this was an incredible experience, an incredible feeling, a feeling of great power. I'm not claiming that I'm special, that I'm some sort of genius, or particularly gifted or talented. In fact, the whole point of the book is to demythologize our concept of genius and creativity. We tend to think that it is something you were born with, something in your DNA, some special way that you're wired. And I wanted to prove that it was actually a product of hard work and discipline. That when you practice something for so many months or years, you can reach this high level of creativity and mastery. And the writing of the book literally confirmed my idea. And because it is a function of relentless dedication, boring into a problem, it is an exhilarating experience that almost anyone can have if they follow the pattern I have laid out. It doesn't mean that if you spend years studying something, creative powers will inevitably come to you. You must have a certain intensity to your focus, as well as a love for the work itself that animates the final product. And it also depends on years of prior labor in the apprenticeship phase, which I had gone through in writing 4 other books. There are no shortcuts to the creative process. Drugs and alcohol are more of a hindrance. The very impatience that drives you to desire shortcuts makes you unsuited for mastery. But if you trust the process and take it as far as you can, you will be amazed at the results.
March 1st. Awaken the dimensional mind. Learning never exhausts the mind. Leonardo da Vinci. As you accumulate more skills and internalize the rules that govern your field, your mind will want to become more active, seeking to use this knowledge in ways that are more suited to your inclinations. What will impede this natural creative dynamic from flourishing is not a lack of talent, but your attitude. Feeling anxious and insecure, you will tend to turn conservative with your knowledge, preferring to fit into the group and sticking to the procedures you have learned. Instead, you must force yourself in the opposite direction. As you emerge from your apprenticeship, you must become increasingly bold. Instead of feeling complacent about what you know, you must expand your knowledge to related fields, giving your mind fuel to make new associations between different ideas. You must experiment and look at problems from all possible angles. As your thinking grows more fluid, your mind will become increasingly dimensional, seeing more and more aspects of reality. In the end, you will turn against the very rules you have internalized, shaping and reforming them to suit your spirit. Such originality will bring you to the heights of power. Daily law. Expand your knowledge to related fields. Pick an auxiliary skill and start practicing. Mastery, Chapter 5. Awaken the dimensional mind, the creative active.
And that was the Daily Law for March the 1st. Awaken the Dimensional. From the Daily Laws by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
What makes you happy is seeking, above all, God's will for you, which is righteousness, which is right order. Once you've found that, Jesus is implying, the other dimensions of your life will tend to fall into right harmony and order around it. Go back to the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And there's that same idea. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. So should I be seeking first food and drink and sex and shelter and comfort? No. Seek first the kingdom of God. Should I seek first even like intellectual attainment? No, that's fine. But seek first the kingdom of God. And then the rest will be given unto you. Your life will now find its proper harmony and order around that center. Peace be with you.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand thought of the day. The deeper significance of the ecological crusade lies in the fact that it does expose a profound threat to mankind. though not in the sense its leaders allege. It exposes the ultimate motive of the collectivists, the naked essence of hatred for achievement, which means hatred for reason, for man, for life. In today's drugged orgy of boastful, self-righteous swinishness, the masks are coming down, and you can hear all but explicit confessions of that hatred, unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now we pick up where we left off with the 33 strategies of war.
There will be times in life when you face a powerful enemy, a destructive opponent seeking your undoing, a slew of seemingly insurmountable problems hitting you at once. It is natural to feel intimidated in these situations, which may paralyze you into inaction or make you wait in the vain hope that time will bring a solution. But it is a law of war that by allowing the larger force to come to you at full strength and unified, you increase the odds against you. A large and powerful army on the move will gain an irresistible momentum if left unchecked. You will find yourself quickly overwhelmed. The wisest course is to take a risk, meet the enemy before it comes to you, and try to blunt its momentum by forcing or enticing it to divide. And the best way to make an enemy divide is to occupy the center. Think of battle or conflict as existing on a kind of chessboard. The chessboard's center can be physical, an actual place like Marathon, or more subtle and psychological. The levers of power within a group, the support of a critical ally, a troublemaker at the eye of the storm. Take the center of the chessboard, and the enemy will naturally break into parts, trying to hit you from more than one side. These smaller parts are now manageable, can be defeated in detail or forced to divide yet again. And once something large is divided, it is prone to further division, to being splintered into nothingness. By Miyamoto Musashi. As your army faces the enemy and the enemy appears powerful, try to attack the enemy in one particular spot. If you are successful in crumbling that one particular spot, leave that spot and attack the next, and so on and so forth, as if you were going down a winding road. Attacking the joints. As a young man, Samuel Adams, 1722 to 1803, of colonial-era Boston, developed a dream. The American colonies, he believed, should one day win complete independence from England and establish a government based on the writings of the English philosopher John Locke. According to Locke, a government should reflect the will of its citizens. A government that did not do so had lost its right to exist. Adams had inherited a brewery from his father, but he did not care about business. And while the brewery veered toward bankruptcy, he spent his time writing articles on Locke and the need for independence. He was an excellent writer, good enough to get his articles published, but few took his ideas seriously. He seemed to rant, to be somewhat out of touch with the world. He had that obsessive glint in the eye that makes people think you're a crackpot. The problem was that the ties between England and America were strong. The colonists did have their grievances, but there was hardly a clamor for independence. Adams began to have bouts of depression. His self-appointed mission seemed hopeless. The British desperately needed money from the colonies, and in 1765 they passed a law called the Stamp Act. To make any document legal, American businesses would be required to purchase and affix to it a stamp of the British Crown. The colonists were growing ticklish about the taxes they paid to England. They saw the Stamp Act as a new kind of tax in disguise, and a few disgruntled voices were raised in urban taverns. Even so, for most, the issue seemed minor, but Adams saw the Stamp Act as the opportunity he had been waiting for his whole life. It gave him something tangible to attack, and he flooded newspapers throughout the colonies with editorials, all fulminating against the act. Without consulting the colonies, he wrote, England was imposing a new kind of tax, and this, in a memorable phrase, was taxation without representation, the first step toward tyranny. These editorials were so well written and so audacious in their criticisms that many began to take a closer look at the Stamp Act, and they did not like what they saw. Adams had never previously gone beyond writing articles, but now that he had lit this fire of discontent, he saw the urgency in stoking it further with action. For many years he had fraternized with working-class people considered riffraff by polite society, dock workers and the like. Now he banded these men into an organization called the Sons of Liberty. The group marched through the streets of Boston, shouting a slogan Adams had coined: Liberty, property, and no stamps. They burned effigies of political figures who had promoted the Stamp Act. They distributed pamphlets containing Adams's arguments against the act. They also worked to intimidate the future distributors of the stamps, even going so far as to destroy one of their offices. The more dramatic the action, the more publicity Adams would earn, publicity into which he could insert arguments against the act. Having gained momentum, the relentless Adams would not stop. He organized a statewide work stoppage for the day the act was to become law. Shops would close. The courts would be empty. Since no business would be conducted in Massachusetts, no stamps would be purchased. The boycott was massively successful. Adams's articles, demonstrations, and boycott made a splash in England, and there were members of Parliament who sympathized with the colonists and spoke out against the Stamp Act. Finally, King George III had had enough, and in April 1766, the act was repealed. Americans rejoiced at their first show of power. The British were smarting from their defeat, however, and the following year they sneaked in another series of indirect taxes, known as the Townshend system. Clearly, they had underestimated their enemy. Adams went to war. As he had with the Stamp Act, he wrote countless articles on the nature of the taxes the English had tried to disguise, once again stirring up anger. He also organized further demonstrations by the Sons of Liberty, now more menacing and violent than ever. In fact, the English were forced to send troops to Boston to keep the peace. This had been Adams's goal all along. He had ratcheted up the tension. Belligerent encounters between the Sons of Liberty and the English troops put the soldiers on edge. And finally, a nervous group of them fired into a crowd, killing several Bostonians. Adams called this the Boston Massacre and spread fiery word of it throughout the colonies. With the people of Boston now bubbling with anger, Adams organized another boycott. No citizen of Massachusetts, not even a prostitute, would sell anything to British soldiers. No one would rent them lodgings. They were shunned in the streets and taverns. Even eye contact was avoided. All of this had a demoralizing effect on the British soldiers. Feeling isolated and antagonized, many of them began to desert or find ways to be sent home. News of the problems in Massachusetts spread north and south. Colonists everywhere began to talk about Britain's actions in Boston, its use of force, its hidden taxes, its patronizing attitude. Then, in 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act. On the surface, a rather harmless attempt to solve the economic problems of the East India Company by giving it a virtual monopoly on the sale of tea in the colonies. The law also levied a nominal tax, but even so, it would have made tea cheaper in the colonies because the middlemen, the colonial importers, were to be cut out. The Tea Act, however, was deceptive in its effect and confusing, and Adams saw in it a chance to apply the coup de grace. It would ruin many colonial tea importers, and it did include a hidden tax, yet another form of taxation without representation. In exchange for cheaper tea, the English were making a mockery of democracy. In language more fiery than ever, Adams began to turn out articles opening up the old wounds from the Stamp Act and the Boston Massacre. When East India Company ships began to arrive in Boston at the end of that year, Adams helped to organize a nationwide boycott of their tea. No dock worker would unload the cargo. No warehouse would store it. Then one night, in mid-December, after Adams had addressed a town meeting about the Tea Act, a group of members of the Sons of Liberty, disguised as Mohawk Indians, body paint and all, erupted in war whoops, charged to the wharves, boarded the tea ships, and destroyed their cargo, cutting open the cases of tea and pouring them into the harbor. All of this done with great revelry. This provocative act, which later became known as the Boston Tea Party, was the turning point. The British could not tolerate it and quickly closed down Boston Harbor and imposed military law on Massachusetts. Now all doubt vanished. Pushed into a corner by Adams, the British were acting just as tyrannically as he had prophesied they would. The heavy military presence in Massachusetts was predictably unpopular, and it was only a matter of months before violence erupted. In April 1775, English soldiers fired on Massachusetts militiamen in Lexington. This shot heard round the world became the spark for the war that Adams had so diligently worked to kindle out of nothing.
And that was the second part of Defeat Them in Detail from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Thank you. If you're a Democrat, a right-thinking Democrat, you need to vote Republican and become a Republican. We are the true party of government. We are the ones that love government. The Democrat Party just loves power. Back in a minute. Thank you. So the left is bluffing. They're always bluffing. And once I know that they are using fear to bully and intimidate people and using various tricks to silence me, then I'm able to lose my fear and regain my effectiveness. One of their prevalent tricks is attitude. The left will act as if. They act as if certain things are inevitable, for instance, and they've used the false confidence to promote the legalization of marijuana. The solution? We can do the same thing. We can act as if the complete abolition of abortion is inevitable. After all, Roe v. Wade is already gone. Back in a minute. Thank you. Whenever you hear the left talk about leadership, that's code word for minority rule. Okay, so remember that. Whenever you hear them say leadership, they're really talking about minority rule. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, policecraft.
The loudest critics of gang injunctions often seem to be people who have never spent any meaningful time in the kinds of communities that gangs torment with everything from drug dealing to drive-bys. They often seem to be people who want to say how things should go in neighborhoods they never have to enter. Easy to fight for the unfettered movement of the 18th Street Crips from your safe, lofty perch miles away on 100th Street. I would recommend that all ACLU adherents embed themselves deeply in gangland territory. Actually live there for a spell. Give it just 6 months, which should be long enough for abstract notions of justice and constitutionalism to turn concrete. Experience this the way the gang members' neighbors do. Feel it on a daily basis, this life under siege. I would suggest earplugs for the nightly gunshots, a throwaway wallet for the inevitable street robbery, and a sound home security system. After 6 months, if the ACLU aficionado remains convinced gang injunctions should be done away with, his position will still be wrong, but at least he'll have earned it. When you're assigned to patrol, you tend not to deal with search warrants much, as they don't typically fall under your area of responsibility. You know detectives and investigators are out there somewhere writing them, and if you're new to the job, you may think that putting together a search warrant affidavit and then getting it signed is some mythical process involving a wizened sage on a mountaintop with a quill pen. But they're actually a pretty routine affair, just like any old police report, really, except a few more clerical vagaries and some boilerplate legalese. And they can put a smoking crater in the life of a bad guy. One of the best things about search warrants is that they're gold-plated. The courts presume they're legal and reasonable. The burden of proof shifts over to the defense to prove the warrant is defective. And you know who presides over any effort the defense makes to show the warrant is faulty? The same judge who originally signed it. Unless you're dealing with a judge who has crippling self-doubt and wishes to publicly express in open court among the very people who elected him what a colossal blunder he made in approving that warrant, you're probably good. Sometimes you try for verbal or written consent to search a suspect's residence to save the time and hassle of getting a warrant. Some cops will say, "Look, buddy, if you don't give me consent, that's fine. I'll just get a warrant and come back here and search the place anyway. Either way, I'm in your house tonight." This may seem like a reasonable approach for the police to take, but you need to mind your word choice. Your goal is consensual entry, but if you tell the person that if he doesn't grant it, you're going to get a warrant and go in anyway, a crafty defense attorney will argue that this negates the consent, which must be freely and voluntarily given. "My client was assured by police that a search warrant was a foregone conclusion," the defense attorney will say, "and that's the only reason he consented." Instead, you want to say you will seek a warrant, which doesn't imply the warrant will automatically be granted. It's a bit of a semantical dance, but there's a fair amount of that in police work. Sometimes you don't have a warrant, but you still want to get into a house to follow up on some leads and perhaps make some arrests. But in the absence of any exigent circumstances, you gotta play it straight. No tricks. You may not go to the door and say you're there on a report of a gas leak, or looking for an abducted child, or show up in plain clothes and pretend to be a delivery man and then whip out your badge once you've crossed the threshold. The U.S. Supreme Court said it best in Bumper v. North Carolina. Where there is coercion, there cannot be consent. As a police officer, you are to be an objective fact finder. You aren't for the victim or the suspect. You aren't against him. That's why it's your legal duty to include exculpatory evidence in your reports. Exculpatory being a big fancy word for evidence that favors the defendant's case and could potentially exonerate him. In reality, human nature being what it is, it doesn't quite work out that way. If you have a credible victim who is injured and afraid, and you have a parolee suspect with 80 prior felony arrests with the shakiest of alibis, you're going to root for the victim and try to clothesline the parolee. But you still have to include any exculpatory evidence. Here are some examples, all from cases I've worked. A victim claims she bit the suspect hard on the hand in self-defense during the assault, but the suspect has no such injuries on him when arrested that same day. A witness was highly intoxicated during the offense. He was so fall-down drunk, if you cut him, Pabst would leak out. Such people make both awful house guests and witnesses, and everything they say has to be closely examined. The victim lied about his name, perhaps to conceal his felony warrant. A key witness wasn't wearing her glasses when the incident went down, and without them, she sees like Mr. Magoo. The victim was a prostitute who was stiffed on her payment. Hell hath no fury. Laws are a funny business. At the time I left the Milwaukee Police Department, the theft of any domestic animal was a felony. On the other hand, $2,500 was the threshold for felony theft. So if you stole $2,499.99 from a victim, you'd be looking at a paltry misdemeanor, even though for many people in poor neighborhoods, that amount of money would be triple their life savings. But get convicted of pilfering Lucky, the anemic cat with the bad leg someone got for free at the shelter, and you'd be looking at hard time. You also still have laws on the books that are lingering vestiges of a time gone by when kids bought penny candy and rode bicycles with playing cards in the spokes. Laws governing how balloons are filled. Regulations on fluoroscopic shoe machines. Adultery is still a crime in many states. In Wisconsin, it's a felony. This caused a minor stir in 2000 when then-married Milwaukee Mayor John Norquist publicly admitted to an affair with a staff member, begging the question, is anyone going to be taking his honor into custody? The answer turned out to be nope. Perhaps the thinking was, if the police arrested everyone who committed adultery, there would be no one left to run the local, state, or federal government. And I assure you, half the police department would be behind bars. As a street cop, you will become wearily familiar with hearing the suspects you arrest on warrants swear they were going to turn themselves in tomorrow. Or they'll insist they were actually on their way to take care of the warrant when you stopped them coming out of the club with a mixed drink in hand. Both bright, shining lies, of course. But what does hold true is that many of these offenders don't think they should be arrested on the warrant. They think they deserve a second chance. But suspects with warrants already had 3 chances before they even cross paths with you. Their first opportunity was to not break the law in the first place. Their second chance was to appear in court when they were supposed to and face the music. Their third chance was to take care of the warrant by turning themselves in or showing up in intake court to get put back on calendar. But they failed at all 3 counts. Now they want a 4th chance with you. As I sometimes ask people, how many chances do you think you should get? 6? 11? 40? Maybe we should abolish laws altogether, just for you, good sir. What's more, you'll encounter suspects who are on their 3rd bench warrant for failing to appear on the same case. Their 5th. Their 8th. And at that point, you stop being disgusted with the suspect because he's a criminal and that's what he does, and you refocus your ire on the court system that keeps letting this man out with yet another future court date rather than keeping him locked up or at least tied to reasonable bail until the case is resolved. This fellow here has firmly established he isn't going to show up for his case unless he is brought there in handcuffs. He could not make this more clear if he hired a skywriter to stencil it in the clouds. He's telling the court through his clear and definable actions that he doesn't respect the police or the judge or the whole damn system. Is anyone listening to this man? The same legal system does not allow for the police to go out of state to pick up certain violators, especially those who have committed only misdemeanors. Even some felony warrants are limited to surrounding states. So you'll run a guy up and he comes back with a drunk driving warrant down south, but there's no extradition. You gotta let him go. It seems unfair that you can escape justice as easily as hopping on a Greyhound, but municipalities don't have the resources to extradite on every misdemeanor or non-violent felony. Justice ends at the border. After you make an arrest and work up the case, you'll lay out all your evidence for the DA. You're impressed by it, and, frankly, you're impressed by you. But sometimes she looks at what you've assembled with only mild interest, like she's examining a novelty car mat. Because while your standard for arrest is probable cause, which means more or less that the suspect probably committed the crime, her standard for charging the case is being able to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt to 12 jurors. Meeting that threshold isn't easy, especially in a liberal stronghold like San Francisco, where some jurors give off the impression that not only are they more than capable of finding reasonable doubt in the most unlikely of places, but that they desperately want to press violent criminals to their nurturing bosom and tell them it wasn't their fault. All of this means it's not really about what happened. It's about what the prosecution can prove. He said, she said cases without additional corroboration go nowhere. Even if your case has legs, the DA might still take a pass. If every case that could be charged was charged, the courts would be more preposterously overburdened than they already are. There are several official dispositions that cover this let's punt approach, such as violation does not justify expense, or discharged for future bundling, or the generic catch-all that drives cops nuts, dismissed in the interests of justice. It's all shorthand for nobody feels like dealing with this. And if you do manage to get your case in front of a judge, it can still be routed away from standard criminal court to a diversion program, like drug court, community court, veterans court, behavioral health court. Now there's something in San Francisco called young adult court. These venues emphasize counseling, community service, and rehab over prison time. All worthwhile endeavors. But the perception among working cops is that such alternatives lack bite to the point where they are collectively deemed no consequences court. It's easy to get disgruntled about the justice system. You come to work and get served with a subpoena for a case that concluded yesterday. Or you show up on a current subpoena and the DA looks surprised to see you. You're here on the Braxton case? That pled out last week. A guy will commit 8 armed robberies but only be charged with 3. The other 5 just get read into the court record. When he's sentenced, the sentences run concurrent. So he essentially gets 5 free armed robberies. Judges put violent defendants on probation and electronic monitoring in lieu of the state pen. In San Francisco, you'll encounter people on double probation for 2 different crimes. You'll run into guys who are on both probation and parole. You could have sworn you just read an article about prison overcrowding, but it's all enough to make you ask, wait, we still have jails, right? Anyone in them? But when you look at how some other countries are doing things, the U.S. doesn't come out looking half bad. In 2013, a 16-year-old was gang-raped in Kenya, suffering severe injuries, and then tossed into a latrine. The suspects were caught. Their punishment? They had to cut the grass near a police station. On the flip side, they're still stoning folks in Saudi Arabia and flogging them in Singapore. If you give it some thought, flogging doesn't sound too unreasonable, especially if the defendant is given the choice between flogging and jail. It cuts down on lockup costs and provides a painful but vivid reminder for the suspect to walk the straight and narrow. Do I sound out of touch? Maybe. But I'm not alone. For more, see criminologist Dr. Peter Moskos' book, In Defense of Flogging. It's a rare thing indeed to feel like a suspect in your case is getting a raw deal, that he didn't do it and got railroaded by the system. But some defendants are factually innocent, which is often revealed when key witnesses recant their testimony or DNA test results point to someone else entirely. Maybe a cop screwed something up along the way out of incompetence or malice. Perhaps the victim just plain got the suspect ID wrong, or a lab tech botched test results. Some of these suspects are lifelong felons who have committed a multitude of crimes, and the time they spent in prison for the one crime they didn't do may have actually protected society from a host of offenses they would have done if they were free. But be that as it may, the question remains, did this man do this crime? That's how the law works. If he did not, and was wrongfully accused, the proper reaction to this set of circumstances is sorrow. My father, a Protestant minister and theologian, addressed this issue as well as anyone during the 2000 opening convocation at Calvin College called On Truthfulness as a Vocation. You will grieve for this man, he said, and for his family, and you will grieve for yourself because you will see that a decade ago you had fought not for the truth, but for a disastrous falsehood, and now nobody can give back to an innocent man all the years that the locust has eaten. Amen, Dad.
And that was the end of Chapter 11 from Policecraft by Adam Plantinga. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.